It's the biggest debate among Sacramento Kings fans right now. What would be better for the Kings for the remainder of the season? Losing games and securing higher draft lottery odds, or going for the play-in and trying to win right away? I look at the arguments, the pros and cons of both sides, and even have some input from you, Locked On Kings listeners. It's all on today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily Sacramento Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time for another episode of Locked On Kings.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Kings, your podcast hub for Sacramento Kings coverage all regular season and all off season. If you're looking for in-depth analysis, game-by-game breakdowns, highlights, interviews with local and national experts, full coverage of your Sacramento Kings from January through December, this is the place for you, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. My name is Matt George, now celebrating 5 years as part of the Locked On Podcast Network, hosting the Locked On Kings podcast. This is my 8th season covering the Kings professionally. I'm with ABC 10 News and Television here in Sacramento as well. Crazy to think about 5 years here with the Locked On Kings podcast, and I've enjoyed the grind. I've enjoyed watching this podcast grow, the rise in popularity, the amount of Kings fans around the world that I've been able to speak to and connect with because of this podcast. I'm so thankful for that. So thankful for the outreach of this podcast, and I do not take it for granted. Absolutely. The one thing that doesn't necessarily work in my favor, though, guys, is that in the 5 years that I've been hosting Locked On Kings, my record for the Kings is 158 wins and 235 losses, which, truth be told, was a little bit better than I was expecting. If I was a coach, that would not be a good win percentage. That would not be a good winning record. But my hands are clean with this. It's not my fault, okay? I can't control if the Kings win or lose. I do know that at some point in the next 5 years of hosting Locked On Kings, I'd like to actually cover a playoff team. And hey, maybe that could be this season. Yeah, that feels like a pipe dream. I know it does. If you're rolling your eyes, don't worry. I'm not here to make an argument that this Kings team has a good chance of making the legitimate playoffs, but we are going to look at and really do an in-depth dive today on this debate that is happening amongst Kings fans right now. And truth be told, I don't think there's a right answer. There's two different paths the Kings can go on. Now, there's one of the paths, and I'll explain this as we get to it. There's one path that I think the Kings are already on. That doesn't make it the right path. It's just the path that I think the Kings are where their mindset is at this point in time. Of course, it could change depending upon what happens, especially in these next couple of games as they play the Spurs tomorrow and the Pelicans on Thursday. Two massive games in terms of the play-in and the Western Conference standings. So things could change really, really quickly. But as of today, March 1st, happy March, everybody. We've made it to March. As of this day, where the Kings are at right now, we're going to really look at the arguments for and against going for draft lottery odds and the Kings losing right now being better than the Kings going for the play-in and trying to win right now. And of course, vice versa, looking at winning right now and how that could be or is better than the team losing and going for draft lottery odds. We're going to start with the argument for the Kings losing, that it would be better for the Sacramento Kings overall to lose games right now and secure higher draft lottery position. And in order to have this conversation, there's one thing that I have to make perfectly clear here. This does not mean tanking. There's a very big difference, at least in my mind, between the Kings actively trying to lose, which I know there are some people on this side who do believe the Kings should actively be trying to lose, and the Kings just losing because they're not there yet, or using this time to focus on other things that could potentially hinder winning. I don't think, in fact, I know that at no point is Alvin Gentry going to pull the plug and say Fox and Sabonis are only playing 15 minutes a night and guys like Damian Jones are going to be getting 30 plus minutes. Like, that is a move, a tanking move. Alvin Gentry is not going to do that, because if he does that, he eliminates all chance that he has of keeping his job. And really, the only chance that Alvin Gentry does have of keeping his job, honestly, is the Kings going on a major run and actually making the playoffs, not just the play-in, the playoffs. We're talking making the play-in more than likely as a 10th seed or maybe a 9th seed if you go on an insane run and then winning 2 games to get into an actual playoff series itself. And even then, I don't know if Gentry keeps his job. So I can guarantee you that the Kings are not going to actively tank at this point in time. Like I said, if things change a week from now, the Kings are completely out of it, then maybe they switch to that. Although I firmly believe that no player on this Kings roster right now is interested in tanking. As much as De'Aaron Fox and Domantas Sabonis understand the value of getting another high pick in this draft, they're not worried about that right now. They believe in the two of them together. So before we even have an argument for draft lottery odds, we need to make it perfectly clear that this argument is not a pro tanking argument. This argument is, well, if the Kings just continue to lose at the rate that they've been losing for basically this entire season, if they end up being like a 32, 33, 34 win team, then that's potentially better than if the Kings were to win more games than that, get into the play-in, potentially lose in the play-in, and then be essentially in a worse version of NBA purgatory with as not of high of a draft pick. So let's look at the argument really here. And honestly, I put this out on social media. I put this out on my Twitter at MattGeorgeSack, and I said I wanted your help. I wanted Kings fans to weigh in on this. And if you go through my mentions, the debate is pretty 50-50, which didn't surprise me at all. This fan base, at least the vocal fan base that I interact with, my Locked On Kings listeners, very divided on this, but pretty divided down the middle. There's some that firmly believe that going for draft lottery odds and losing right now is the right route. And in fact, that's the smart route to go. And there are so many that believe that winning is important. You want to get Fox and Sabonis on the same page. And really, the way I've simplified it, basically how I made it make sense to myself is one argument is a kind of factual, statistical probability argument. And another argument is more of a things that aren't recorded in a stat column, things that don't have numbers behind it, but like the importance of the eye test, the importance of success on the court, the importance of your 2 new main pieces understanding how to win together and sending the right message to someone like Domantas Sabonis. The logical statistical argument is that if you're looking at odds, the Kings have better odds. It is more tactically sound. If you're looking at this like you're playing NBA 2K, if you're looking at this like it's a strategy game, it is more tactically sound and statistically better for the Kings to turn their attentions towards the draft lottery. Because if you're looking at their draft lottery odds right now, currently the Kings have the best odds at the 6th overall pick, a 37% chance of moving into the top 4, a 9% chance at number 1 overall. I would say 9% chance at number 1 overall is a lot higher than maybe a sub 1-2% chance that the Kings actually make it through the play-in and into the playoffs themselves. Is 37.2% of the Kings moving into the top 4? Is that a higher percentage than the Kings actually making it into the play-in? I think so. The odds are more in the Kings' favor if they take the draft lottery route. Not to mention, they're only a couple games back of the 5th best odds currently held by the Indiana Pacers and 3 games back of the 4th best odds. I'd say top 3 is pretty much out of reach with Detroit, Orlando, and Houston pretty much securing those spots. But the Kings could be as bad as 4, which gives you a 48% chance at a top 4 pick and a 12.5% chance at number 1 overall. It is easier to see the Kings improving in that area and is more statistically likely for the Kings to improve in that area and have success in that area through the lottery than it is for the Kings to go for the play-in just based off the competition and where they're at in the standings right now. I think that is the major argument that is appealing to those who are on the side of draft lottery odds. They see the play-in for what it is. And I've said this many times here on the Locked On Kings podcast. Truth be told, I've made arguments for both sides on my own, and it's changed over the course of this season. But most people on the draft lottery odds side recognize that the play-in is lipstick on the pig. The play-in is, sure, it's an extra minimum game, a single elimination game that goes beyond the regular season. By technicality, it is postseason, but we know it is not playoffs. But if you are to be eliminated in the play-in tournament, it doesn't do anything for you other than a game or two of that experience. Ultimately, you end up with at best 9, probably 10, 11, 12 range lottery pick. Now, some people believe, and if we went over to the win now argument, which we're going to do in the next segment, some people believe that in the draft, as long as you draft correctly, having the 5th overall pick and having the 10th or 11th overall pick, it really isn't that big of a difference. But those on the draft lottery odds side would argue that the value of the draft pick, not necessarily the likelihood of drafting a star, because we've seen the Kings with high lottery picks botch those high picks in the past, right? Not Monty McNair, but the Kings, we know their draft track record. But the value of the pick, if it's top 5 or top 4, is significantly higher than top 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And the value of the draft pick is a really important piece of this argument, because I believe that McNair is more than likely going to use this draft pick, shop this draft pick to try and get the Kings a non-rookie piece that fits alongside Fox and Sabonis. I have no idea who that name is. I have no idea what the market is for that player, but draft picks, first round picks, lottery picks are already plenty valuable. The higher it is, the more valuable it gets. And we've seen teams be able to turn a top 5 pick into a damn good player. Not to mention the Kings have pieces like a Rashawn Holmes to sweeten the deal even more to potentially get an even bigger name. So a lot of people are looking at that in terms of draft lottery odds. Ultimately, we all recognize, whether you're arguing for winning right now or arguing for draft lottery, we all recognize the playoffs are a pipe dream at this point in time, right? It's really play-in versus draft lottery. And like I said, the logical, more statistical mind trends towards the draft lottery with the better odds of success. It's risk versus more of the safe play. And there are a lot of people that believe that the Kings need to play it safe. There's also a couple more elements of this argument that I really found amongst conversation amongst Kings fans on social media. And that's one, it doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing that the Kings are losing games, in the sense that maybe you use the opportunity to play Davion Mitchell heavy minutes, see if he could potentially start alongside De'Aaron Fox and how he fits with Domantas Sabonis. Like I said, the Kings can still and likely still will lose a fair amount of games, even with Fox and Sabonis playing together. So it doesn't mean that you have to shut the two of them down and that you're wasting their time and wasting the opportunity in these final 20 or so games to get them comfortable playing together. You can do that while losing and increasing your lottery odds. It's possible. But as we'll talk about later, would it be better overall for the Kings right now and going forward for Fox and Sabonis to show that they can win together, to figure things out early and essentially get a head start on their playoff hopes for next season? I wouldn't just say playoff hopes, I'd say playoff expectations. One other element that you could make an argument on both sides with this element, but I think it makes a little more sense for the draft lottery. And I think a couple people mentioned this on social media. If the Kings were to go on a run together, if Fox and Sabonis were to suddenly figure everything out and this group puts together this run, they try and win, and they do win enough games to actually make the play-in, things are going to change regardless because of the likelihood of a new coach coming in here. It's very unlikely, as important as it is for a coach to come in and match their system around their players, it's unlikely that someone is going to come in here. Let's say Kenny Atkinson is hired. Let's say he comes in here. He's not going to run the same thing that Alvin Gentry is running. So things are going to change regardless. Even if you make progress in Fox and Sabonis and this group figuring out how to play together a specific way, that is more than likely going to change because of a new head coach when he comes in. So that's another argument that I've seen ultimately for draft lottery odds. Now, we're going to look at the argument against draft lottery odds and for winning right now. And if I'm being honest, as of right now, this is the side that I'm trending on a little bit more. And I'm leaning towards this side a little bit more. But it's also the side that is harder to make an argument for. because it's more of a risk. We'll get to that. Before we get to that, though, it's not just going to be me talking today. I asked on yesterday's pod for you to send in audio clips of your thoughts, your stance on this argument. And I got a couple of audio clips that I'm happy to play for you. The first one is from my guy, Devin Heston. I think I'm pronouncing your name right, Devin. He sent this in and he is pro draft lottery odds focus. Here's what Devin had to say.
Hey Matt, this is Devin from Davis. I just wanted to weigh in on whether winning now or higher draft lottery odds are best for the Kings' future. I think it's pretty clear that higher draft lottery odds is the answer because whether the team uses a higher pick to draft a future All-Star or packages the pick in a trade for another high-caliber player to surround Fox and Sabonis with, the pick and more moves this summer is what takes this team from where they are now to a perennial playoff team. This team is currently constructed would still most likely be a play-in at best team next year. We don't want to become the Magic who make the playoffs every other year just to get swept or gentlemen swept by the top seed. The next step in the process of becoming a perennial playoff team is having a top 5 pick in this draft. Drafting in the back end of the lottery is only going to keep netting us solid starters, but not the game changers that we really need. Pushing for a play-in game that they'll most likely lose when they have a hard remaining schedule does very little to help the future of this team, which most likely is going to have a new coach and a new cast of supporting players next season. Worsening your pick just makes it harder to acquire that franchise-changing piece. I really enjoy your show. Please let me know what you think.
I love that argument from Devin, and he makes a lot of fantastic points. What I like about that most from Devin is that he makes it perfectly clear what his expectations are and what his focus is for this team following this season, because this offseason is incredibly important regardless of what happens in these final 20 or so games. And his focus is clear. He said it there. It's not just about getting a solid starter. It's about getting a game changer. The Kings are looking to add a game changer alongside Fox and Sabonis. Now, I would say the likelihood of that, regardless of what happens, is pretty low because it's difficult for the Kings to acquire that game changer. But if there's a clear route to do that, it's through trading a valuable draft pick. So I like what Devin had to say there, reiterated a lot of the points that we already discussed. If you agree with Devin, let me know why. If you disagree with Devin, let me know why. You can send me those takes at any time at MattGeorgeSack on Twitter. Email me, mattgeorgesports@gmail.com, or you can leave your thoughts in the YouTube comment section down below. And if you want to be like Devin and start sending me audio clips just of your thoughts, maybe even video clips too. I can play a video here. If you want to share your opinions on the show, that is an easy way to do it. Send them to my email, mattgeorgesports@gmail.com. And if they're good and if they make sense towards the conversation, I'm going to try and implement those more on the podcast because I want more of your voice out there and not just my own. But let's switch gears here. Let's move over to the win now argument. We're going to do that in the next segment after I tell you about our friends at Bet Online. Football might be over for the season, but basketball is in full steam for both pro and college hoops. From all the latest odds, totals, player performance props to where the next fired coach is going to land, betonline.net is the number one spot for all of your sports betting needs. BetOnline remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. And it's not just basketball, of course. BetOnline is your source for hockey, boxing, and UFC odds. And if baseball ever comes back, if Ron Manfred wants to get his head out of his ass, then once baseball happens, we will have baseball odds here, of course, on BetOnline as well. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and get in on the action at BetOnline, where the game starts. So if the logical, statistical, safer route for the Kings is draft lottery odds, and also, quite honestly, more likely route just because this team is going to struggle to win regardless, then this team actively pursuing winning, doing everything they can to win games at the risk of a worse draft pick is more of the emotional argument. But it is an argument that I completely understand and relate to in a lot of ways, because I, like many Kings fans, look at this playoff drought as a whole. We have a hard time separating them by eras. Right now, we are in season 2. We're going into off season 3 of Monty McNair's era. And truth be told, outside of the draft, McNair has been relatively quiet and not had the most impressive of off seasons. Now, I think he had an incredibly impressive and very active trade deadline here, landing Domantas Sabonis even at the loss of Tyrese Halliburton. But when I look at the idea of the Kings losing again and turning our hopes towards the draft lottery and higher draft odds again, what immediately pops into my brain is how many times have the Kings done that in the past? And how many times has it failed them? We've seen, like I said on the last segment, Kings had the number 2 overall pick because of draft lottery odds, which, by the way, they got number 2 overall because they got lucky and moved all the way up from either 8 or 9. And they botched that. They also got lucky moving up to number 5 in order to get De'Aaron Fox. And because that was the year that they traded DeMarcus Cousins away, they got lucky and moved up in that draft a little bit as well. So as much as the odds are more in your favor, it is still a game of chance on the draft lottery odds side versus you can have something proven, tangible on the floor right now that is promising, that is proven, that is more impactful, and that is enticing to a lot of Kings fans. A lot of Kings fans who, quite frankly, are tired of losing, and the last thing they want to do is actively root for the team to lose. Now, I understand that fans on the draft lottery odds side of the argument aren't happy to see the Kings lose, but they understand, or at least in their mind, it gives the Kings a better chance to be better tomorrow. I get that. They're not wanting to see the Kings fail just because they're evil and they enjoy that. They think that that is the most likely route to the Kings making the improvements that they need to make this offseason, like we heard Devin talk about here just a second ago. But I believe, as many Kings fans believe, that it is more valuable for the Sacramento Kings with the 2 pieces that we know are already here to get on the same page and show not just that they can be good together, but that they are good together. There's a big difference because we've already seen enough in these first 6 or so games or 7 or so games that they've played together that we know that they can be effective. But tell me you wouldn't be more encouraged and more optimistic going into this offseason if Fox and Sabonis won enough together and played so well together that the Kings started winning games because of the 2 of them, with good complementary games from guys like Davion Mitchell and Justin Holiday and Dante DiVincenzo, guys who are more than like Harrison Barnes too, guys that are more than likely going to be on this Kings roster next season. To me, that's incredibly valuable. And that's what a lot of Kings fans are yearning for at this point. It doesn't have as much to do about the playoffs and the play-in and that playoff drought as maybe initially it would have to us. I think, to me, if I'm making this argument and leaning more towards this side, it's truthfully more about seeing something on the floor that is successful and not hoping that another thing off the floor can make the Kings better on the floor tomorrow. Now, again, no matter what the Kings do for the remainder of this season, changes are going to happen this offseason. Changes are going to happen. There's no way the Kings, even if they go on some amazing magical run, that's going to be like lightning in a bottle. There's no way that they're going to be able to say, okay, we run this same group back next year and we're for sure a playoff team. That's not going to happen. Changes are absolutely going to be coming. And maybe it's because of those changes that you feel more comfortable arguing for the draft lottery odds side. I'm just saying I'd rather go into an offseason knowing those changes are coming with more of a foundation, a solid understanding of how good Fox and Sabonis can be together. Or if you really want to take the pessimistic side of things, maybe you go for wins and you find out that the 2 of them just don't work together. And then maybe Monte McNair considers using Fox as a trade asset this offseason. I think that's very unlikely, but that's a pessimistic way to view trying to win for the remainder of this season. I also think, and this is something that you can't really track, it's not something that I can tangibly pull examples from or look at a piece of paper and look at a stat column, but I think sending the right message to your players is important, especially to Domantas Sabonis, who is only under contract for 2 more years. Now, he came from a situation in Indiana where the Pacers, even though they haven't been the greatest, they've been far more successful than the Sacramento Kings have been in recent memory. And as much as Sabonis likes California because his wife is from here and he says he's happy where he's at, we've seen a lot of players come into Sacramento happy to be here initially who get pretty soured by things pretty quickly because of the culture of this place. And culture is important. If the Kings can use this time to somehow establish a winning culture, build that momentum going into the offseason, again, I think that's more valuable than this team just losing for the remainder of the season and not necessarily wasting these final 20 games, but exiting the season with from a player standpoint, kind of a bitter taste in your mouth. Even if from a general manager standpoint, you're rubbing your hands together going, oh, we got the best odds of the 5th overall pick. That could be really good for us. It's more like a GM off the court focus versus a player on the court focus. And quite honestly, it's on the court where the Kings need to get results at this point in time, which is why I really tend to focus and lean towards that. I just would like to see something basketball on the floor, tangible evidence that this team not only can, but is good with a Fox and Sabonis core, with a Barnes, DiVincenzo, Mitchell complementing group that you're going to hopefully only improve and add on to this upcoming offseason. But I'm also aware that this is a risk. It's a big risk in the sense that the likelihood is, and I admit this fully, the likelihood is the Kings won't make the play-in. And if they do, it's even a higher likelihood that they will be out in the first game, that they're not going to win. Even if they win the first game, they still have to win the second as well. The likelihood of them winning 2 in a row single elimination games, it's possible, but that likelihood's pretty low. And if the Kings were to actually make the play-in, they're probably dropping minimum 2, maybe 3 spots in the lottery. And those 3 spots could be the difference between attracting a team who's trying to trade a big name away and not being able to get that deal done. I recognize that. I recognize the arguments for both sides. Again, this is more of the side that I'm leaning towards. But that's more of my emotion than it is my logic. Because a few weeks ago, before Tyrese was traded for Sabonis, which, by the way, another part of this argument for me personally is if I'm going to be okay with the Kings trading Tyrese Halliburton, I want to see the team being better immediately. And we've seen flashes of them being better, but overall not as good as I want. So that's my personal argument in here. I don't expect others to have that mindset, but for me personally, the only way I'm really going to be okay with seeing Tyrese Halliburton in an Indiana Pacers jersey is if I know the Kings are better right away. So I personally want to see that. But again, that's just me. Overall, you know where I stand or where I'm leaning, even if I have made arguments for the other side. And before this, the Tyrese Halliburton Domantas Sabonis trade, I was arguing full on for the other side. Because at that point, I didn't think that roster and that team was going anywhere. This roster, I think, can go somewhere and is going somewhere. And I want to see evidence of that on the floor. But enough of my chit chat. Now let's get some input from a listener of the Locked On Kings podcast who also agrees with this side or has the belief that this is the right side. He's a Twitter user, and I know Rito isn't his real name, but it's the name of his Twitter account. His Twitter handle you'll see here on your screen in just a second. He's also from abroad. Here's Rito sharing his thoughts on this side, the win now side of the argument.
I prefer the Sacramento Kings to lose game intentionally, or would I prefer them to try and win games now? I'd want them to win games now, because I just checked the odds. Like, let's say we did tank, right? Let's say we tanked all the way, like, 2 or 3 places for the rest of the season, right? If I would only increase our odds by 3%, I might have got that wrong. It depends on the website I got it from. But 3%, that, you know, those odds, like, I don't see the point for 3%. Why would we risk everything? Like, that's a lot of money to tank for 3% of better odds of getting number 1, number 2, that kind of thing. You know, I don't see much of it when we could be using the playing time to see what works. You know, we only have Domantas for like 2 more years. Only have, you know, so many players for so long. I don't see the point of it. We could be using time and money much better.
So Rito has an argument that makes a lot of sense to me too about you want to maximize the time that you have for the remainder of the season, and essentially rolling a team out there that is going to lose every night. It feels like you are wasting time. It doesn't necessarily have to be that case, like I made in the last segment in the argument for draft lottery odds, but it does feel that way to some fans, and I understand that. I also like that Rito did take more of a logical kind of statistical approach to this and really looked at the difference between top lottery odds between pick or spot 5, 6, 7, 8. It's only a few percentage points. Now, of course, a few percentage points can make all the difference when it comes to the ping pong balls at the end of the day. But to Rito, clearly, and to many Kings fans who agree with Rito, a few percentage points, 1 or 2 spots, is not that big of a deal compared to the possibility of this team winning more right now and showing that they're moving in the right direction right now. Thank you, Rito, for reaching out on Twitter. Again, if you want to be like Rito, you want to be like Devin, you want to start sharing your thoughts here in a video or audio format and be a part of the podcast itself, start sending those to me. And if they're good, they're topical, it could be after a game. You just send me your thoughts on the game. I want to start doing that more. I want to start implementing you and your voice on Locked On Kings more because I've been so thankful for the amount of you who listen to me and use Locked On Kings as a source of both entertainment and news. But this is also a community, and this fan base deserves to have their voices heard. So if I can help with that at all here on Locked On Kings, I want to do that. But there you go. Those are the arguments for both sides. Now I need you to tell me where you're leaning. You can send me audio files if you want. You can just let me know on Twitter at MattGeorgeSack. Of course, you can email me at any time too. Or if you're watching on YouTube, get loose in the comment section. I want to see this conversation, this debate continue. And I expect this debate to continue through towards the very end of this Kings season, or at least the Kings play-in hopes are alive beyond these next couple of games. Before we wrap up, want to make sure you know about another great sponsor here of the Locked On Kings podcast, that is Rock Auto. And with the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts that you need. Why would you endure often pointless or seemingly intimidating questioning and wait while the person behind the counter only orders the parts on their computer, choosing the brands that their warehouse happens to carry at their fixed price points? You have computers with access to Rock Auto, and you also have your phone with access to Rock Auto, where you can save 30, 50, or 100% more for the same exact parts with the different brands. You have options. Rock Auto, you will save money and you will save time. Rock Auto is a family business serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years. Their prices are reliably low for every customer. It doesn't matter if you know a lot about cars, or if you're someone who like me, who just stares at it and says, go, turn on. And if everything goes wrong or anything goes wrong, then you're basically SOL. At Rock Auto, you can save money to get the parts that you need, so you're a little bit SOL, because they have everything like brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, and even new carpet. When you go to rockauto.com right now, make sure you write Locked On in there. How did you hear about us box, so they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. Let the debate continue. Weigh in, share your thoughts. Which side are you on? If you're a fence seater as well and you haven't made a decision, that's fine too. Let's discuss it. Let's talk about it. Again, I don't think there is a right answer, and I see people getting passionate about this. I'm never going to tell you not to be passionate in what you believe in, especially with this Kings fan base who overflows with passion. The passion is the only thing that has kept our purple flame in our hearts lit for this 15, probably going to be 16 season playoff drought. But let me know what side you're on. Make sure we continue this conversation. That's what's extremely important here. And again, thank you so much for the last 5 years. It's been incredible for me to be able to watch this podcast grow. I'm looking forward to another 5 years and beyond. Hopefully during those 5 years, I'm actually covering a playoff series, but we'll have to see what happens going into this offseason. That's going to be incredibly important. No matter what happens the remainder of this season, this offseason, next season, Locked On Kings will absolutely have you covered. So make sure you continue to use Locked On Kings as that source of news and entertainment. And like I said with both Devin and Rito, if you want to be a part of the show too, that is the opportunity is there for you. The window is open for that as well. Please send me those audio takes or video takes if you would like to potentially be a part of the show going forward. Thank you so much for your support. As always, can't wait to have you join me on the next episode of Locked On Kings. Big game tomorrow night against the Spurs. Following that game, we'll have a post-game podcast for you. So I hope you'll join me for that. Until then, my name is Matt George. You have been listening to Locked On Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.